Hi everybody, it's Hero back with another Dragonflight video, and we're taking a look at Melee Mythic Plus tier list. This is just for Dragonflight, and it's only for the Melee classes, and it's only in PvE Mythic Plus content. So if this does not track with what you think is the best or the worst, don't worry about it, but let me know in the comments. We'll get started here with S tier, which is Windwalker Monk and our Outlaw Rogue. Now, these two specs, guys, are dominating currently on the beta, and they are doing so for a couple of reasons. First of all, their tuning is quite high, and they have burst CDs for AoE and single target. Both of those are quite good. They are an energy class, so they don't have a lot of downtime or need to ramp up their spells. They've got great utility, some unique utility across the board, things like Ring of Peace, for rogues, things like a consistent kidney shot, shrouding your group, blinds, a lot of ad control. They also have amazing survivability, not just for rogues, cheat, death, vanish, cloak, karma we get, right, with monks, transcendence, diffuse, dampen, harm. All of these pretty premier level on use buttons that you can use to get out of trouble. And probably the best thing for these two classes is just the current state of tuning. They have been nerfed a couple times and they're still producing high amounts of damage. So the combined element of all of these together puts these in S tier in my opinion. Then we have our A tier, which is our Havoc Demon Hunter, Feral Druids, and Sub Rogues. These classes are pretty close to our S tier classes. Their damage is quite solid. They have good burst AoE. They also have solid sustained AoE, and their single target is good. In some cases, it's up to snuff. I think Havoc is probably close to S tier as far as its single target, but maybe just a tiny bit behind. And Sub Rogue here is the one problem with it is that you could be playing Outlaw, and Sub's rotation is very straightforward in AoE, so it's also just really quite good. But that's always going to be a problem for rogues. Utility is nice, so we know rogue utility, but AoE silences and stuns from demon hunters. We have maims, which are essentially kidney shots, right? We have roar, incap, shouts, darkness. You have a lot of this cyclone stuff, pushing and pulling mobs. All of this is really good utility that is available to druids. And their survivability likewise is good. They have some cheat deaths there, another walk cheat deaths, so some really strong personals like survival instincts and frenzied regeneration. You get predatory swiftness for sustained regeneration, and of course DHs getting blur, vanish, all pretty incredible. Their tuning is quite good. It might, if we get another nerf to those top specs, these ones might step into those spots. I'm especially watching Feral Druid, which is doing absolutely absurd amounts of sustained damage, meaning that on Fortified, it's going to be probably a premier group because you can kite and pull really tough Fortified mobs while retaining those bleeds. So I'm excited to track them. Then in our B tier, we have specs that have essentially very good single target or AoE damage, but not always all of it at the same time. And this is your Enhancement Shaman, your Ret Paladin, and your Unholy DK. So these are quite strong burst AoE and sustained AoE. But there's some mixed bag between how much they can produce in single target or two targets outside of those situations. And there's some resources that are required to ramp that. Maelstrom weapon stacks for Enhancement Shaman, obviously Holy Power, and then runes and rune regeneration. They're still quite smooth as far as the specs go, but depending on what's going on, you might have more single target out of these or less. Their utility is pretty solid across the board. You got AoE stuns with Cap Totem, you get Bop and Sack, which is quite unique. You have a good amount of off healing from two of these specs, and AMZ and Grips are also quite unique as far as their utility. For some affixes, you're going to want those little pieces to get mobs out of Sanguine or to move mobs or to isolate different ones. So these are all pretty premier pieces. And their survivability is probably a little bit less overall than the other two tiers, even though we have a Ret Paladin with Bubble. Bubble is kind of good, but Ret is kind of paper outside of that. Their other defensive doesn't provide a really strong DR, it's just a little shield. And enhancement and uh, Unholy DK, though they have things like Death Pact, IBF, and AMS, and Astral Shift, it's a mixed bag whether they're that good. Probably Unholy DK is a little better, and though enhancement has good off healing, I think its defensive capabilities are not quite as good as some of the other specs. Like no immunity, and your Astral Shift's 1.5 minutes if you talent into it. Isn't that good? But you do get great utility out of these specs. You get totems, you can move things around, so they're quite strong. And at the moment, they're well tuned. So even though enhancement got a nerf, it's still doing quite good damage in Mythic Plus. A lot of excellent AoE in all three of these specs. Probably a little bit lackluster single target is my take. All right, let's head back up, and we will take a look at the C tier. So these are classes that have to, generally speaking, focus on AoE damage and have a history of doing that, maybe through ramping or CDs, but maybe their single target isn't quite as strong, or you can't mix those together depending on the talents, and their survivability is perhaps a little bit worse. So one of the things that's interesting about this set of specs is you have good burst damage, good, especially AoE burst damage through breath, through giant CDs from Fury Warrior, like Odin's Fury, Dragon's Roar, that kind of stuff with Avatar, and of course the Bombardiers for survival hunters, though there are other ways to play it too with Carve. But generally speaking, they're kind of proc dependent, so if you get a lot of procs, you get a lot of bombs. If you get a lot of procs, you have runic power that sustains your breath, that kind of stuff, right? Their utility is reasonable. You get traps, blinding sleet type things, shockwave, but you kind of have to choose talents to get there, especially in the case of Fury Warrior. Picking and going down shockwave is going to take away other options for you in the class side, and that's borne out a little bit for Frost DKs, but there's nothing wrong with Rally and AMZ. They're all great, but maybe not quite as good as your S or A tier. And their survivability, I find, is just okay. Outside of Turtle, Hunters are a little squishy. Warriors have to time their stuff very assiduously because they're low CDs like Spell Reflect, which are quite good, but you have to be on it. And Die by the Sword obviously doesn't last that long. Outside of that, their positioning has to be very, very careful. Like Rogues get movement speed and they get a lot of range, especially Outlaw. So they can be moving around in packs, or if you're playing sub, you can just be fanning in an area to build combo points and then spend them. So that's partly what keeps these apart from some of these melee specs that really need to be connecting all the time in order to do their work. So they do have a giant AoE ceiling. If you have massive pulls, guys, these specs can shine. I mean, others can as well, but these ones certainly benefit from having high target counts. And maybe their survivability is a little behind, but that's why they're in this tier. Finally, we have our D tier, which is Assassination Rogue and Arms Warrior. Now, these specs are kind of unique, and this is why they're down here in D tier, not because they don't do good damage, they just have to, generally speaking, make a choice within their talents. And this is the main thing setting them apart in a Mythic Plus setting where you can sometimes, especially on 4 to 5 weeks, make a choice and do massive Blade Storm damage with huge SOS whirlwinds and cleaves. And it's crazy damage, but your single target is just not really present. You can't index into execute at the same time. Likewise, for assassination, you can do big AoE spreads on your bleeds through Carnage, but that takes you down one portion of the talent, and you can't necessarily get to all of Zoldikes for execute damage on our poisons. You can't make use of double poison applications with dragon tempered stuff. There's this mix of problems for the talent selections in these two specs that really keep them back from being what you would normally think of as the top tier melee Mythic Plus classes. I am probably going to main Arms Warrior, and I love the spec, but for me that means I'm going to have to make distinct choices about what I'm offering in the Mythic Plus setting. Am I just going giant Blade Storms, or am I going to focus more on sweeping and doing a lot of execute and SKS bleed stuff. So it's not like you can't do damage and you probably will be able to succeed and push stuff. I just think the general problem of having to choose talents is going to hold them back significantly. Assassination does have all the same rogue stuff, although kidney shot's a little weird for them. You can talent into stuff that makes it worth doing. But other than that, guys, that makes these two specs kind of the bottom of the list. It doesn't mean they're bad. It just means you got to have someone at the bottom, and these two specs are the ones that made it. That's my Melee Mythic Plus Dragonflight tier list. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think in the comments, and we will catch you next time.